all that success that I wanted is right there. A song I had written for Sanctus Real called Lead Me was number one on the radio.
Matt Hammett is the former lead singer of Sanctus Real. But on the day of the band's greatest success, all Matt cared about was his newborn son's health.
5 days after Bowen was born, he went in for his first open heart surgery.
And not long after dealing with his son's life-threatening condition, Matt and his wife, Sarah, were facing a threat to their marriage.
Sarah and I were just like having probably one of the worst arguments of our marriage over the phone. And she said to me, she's like, you know what? When you come home, I'm not going to have you back at the house. I'm going to move your stuff out. And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing.
I'm in a desperate place. I need to share the weight, but I just don't know how to let it all pour out.
God came through for Matt and Sarah, and he showed them how to handle their family's struggles. And Matt's going to tell us all about it on this episode of GPS, God, People, Stories. It's an outreach of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. I'm Phil Fleischman.
And I'm Jim Kirkland. You'll also hear from Billy Graham on a subject that is something Matt Hammett knows very well, the importance of a changed heart.
The Bible teaches that our heart is the seat of the emotion. Fear and love and courage and anger and joy and sorrow are always associated with the heart.
More on that a little later on, or if you just can't wait, you can always listen to classic Billy Graham messages like this one by going to billygrahamradio.org and then clicking on Billy Graham Audio Archives. What you just heard came from a message titled Heart Disease from 1957. Again, that's Billy Graham Audio Archives, and you'll find that at billygrahamradio.org.
And that website is where you will also find all 220 plus episodes of GPS, as well as more than 1,500 Billy Graham sermons, and lots more encouraging audio for you to listen to. Again, the address is billygrahamradio.org, and there is a link to it in the show notes.
GPS.
God.
People. Stories.
So I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. One of my most vivid memories is being kind of an anxious kid and trying to find my place. And I was bullied a lot.
So what do you do with an anxious, bullied student? Well, how about give him the lead role in the school play? At least that's what Matt Hammett's fourth grade teacher did at the Christian school he attended. It was a pivotal moment in Matt's childhood.
It was like her confidence in me and the love that she showed me really did make me feel like I found my identity, in who Christ wanted me to be, and that identity in him was whole and complete. And so that was a really formative year for me.
Being in that play was just the first time of many times that Matt would perform during his school years. You see, when Matt was in 10th grade, he met a guy named Chris Roman.
I had this love for music, and I met him, and he had love for music too. He was actually playing his guitar when I met him in the lunchroom, and I just remember going up to him and talking with him, and we decided that we would start making music together. And some of the older kids took notice of that and invited us to be part of the chapel band, which played once a week. And so we kind of got our feet wet in music, just playing in chapel band together. And then through that, realized that we really wanted more.
So Matt and Chris founded the band Sanctus Real. Sanctus is Latin for holy. Drummer Mark Grallman found that word in the dictionary. And then the guys just slapped real onto the end of it to come up with the band name Sanctus Real.
And we never imagined that this band we started with a funny name in high school would be something we did for 20 years. So really from the time I was 16 to the time I was 36, I was in this band. It was really kind of the only thing that I knew was making music and being on the road.
It was during the early days of Sanctus Real, while on the road, that Matt met his wife, Sarah.
I was playing at a local Christian music festival, and I was back by our merchandise table, under one of those big white tents. And I just looked out that evening while I think Third Day was playing, and she was just out there. she was just dancing around and she was like so carefree. Like something about her smile and just the way she looked, like just drew me in.
But Matt wasn't able to muster up the confidence to introduce himself until the next night after Matt saw Sarah again at a different concert in a different town.
It was like a gathering of churches from all over the area. And so we went that morning and we're leading worship. And at some point, I like look out and I see her there in the crowd. It turns out that her mother's church and her grandmother's church were part of this event. And she was in Columbus the night before because that's where she went to school. And she had come back with her brother after the festival and went to this event with her parents. And so it was just amazing. Like, I'm like, man, I wanted to talk to this person so bad, 3 hours south the night before. And here we are back home and she's right there. And so I just didn't let it go. I went up to her and talked to her and ended up hanging out with her that week. And the rest is history.
Matt and Sarah were 19 when they met, and they got married at 21. Now, in those 2 years in between that, Sanctus Real signed their first record deal.
And so our record, was coming out really within 6 months after our wedding day. And so we actually went and had our honeymoon and then almost immediately hopped in a 15-passenger van and trailer with, my bandmates. So it was kind of crazy because, most married people come home to an apartment or a new home. But for us, we came home to the van with my stinky bros. And so you can imagine that it was like a whole interesting set of circumstances to marry into for her, poor girl.
Interesting circumstances indeed. Matt and Sarah were excited for the doors God was opening for the band, and they loved the idea of touring and ministering together. But it wasn't exactly the best situation for their marriage to grow and flourish.
The lack of space, that was really where things were hard. It wasn't just like, we didn't have privacy for intimacy, but it was also that we didn't have the space to communicate hard things to each other. And so what would happen is we would have hurt feelings as young couples do as they're learning to do life together. You're young, you're more sensitive, like in this space where we couldn't hash it out in a healthy way. And so we just bottle it up inside. And what would happen is as we bottled it up, the contempt would grow in those moments and over those months, and we'd get back home and it would just all come out. It would just explode in that moment. And so there wasn't a healthy cycle of communication for us, which became really our most difficult struggle as newlyweds.
And that struggle actually continued for the next decade as Matt and Sarah tried to figure out how to have healthy conflict and communication. During that time, they had 2 daughters, and Matt had a serious realization about his faith.
I was in a relationship with Christ, but there was a disconnect for me. Like, okay, how many Bible verses did you read today? How many minutes did you pray? How many good things did you do for somebody? And these are all, right, like meant to be the outcome of loving Jesus, but it's not what makes us love Jesus. And so I think I was more focused on those things than what was meant to be the starting point, which was the transformation of my heart.
Matt's heart started to change when he read a book by the late Brennan Manning, who wrote about how his faith in Christ freed him from an alcohol addiction.